pain trumps empathy. Right? What a simple statement, but something we all have to pay attention to. You might believe that you're really aware and empathizing with other people around you, but when you experience your own pain or your own disappointment, it's pretty natural for your empathy to decrease, and it can even take a pretty big nosedive.
Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your step family from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of step family life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome. We are excited that you're here as always.
Hello, hello.
Hey, if you missed our discussion with Lauren Reitzema and her mom, Janine McKenzie, last week, you have got to go back and listen to it. It was so fun and so good. And there was this little piece in there where we talked about empathy, and especially as it's related to what we've probably all got coming up this weekend, and that's Christmas. And, you know, there's a lot of wants, a lot of dreams, a lot of desires around the holidays of what we hope to experience with our family. And a lot of times that's focused on us, but empathy is often focused on someone else. And so that's what we want to dive into today. We want to talk about empathy.
Absolutely. We're talking about the benefits and the barriers to empathy.
Oh, boy.
And there's no doubt about it. The ability to respond with empathy is a relational skill that's incredibly valuable, especially within the complexities of blended family life.
Right.
And there's some valid reasons why this is so important for us. It's really common and normal for everyone living in the same blended family to have very different perspectives.
Oh, boy, howdy.
Understanding the perspectives of our family members can increase our ability to connect with one another in a meaningful way and to respond better when the tension is high. Empathy is the key to understanding, and it drives connection. It's actually pretty amazing because an empathetic response to a stressful situation can quickly ease the relational tension.
Yeah.
It can reduce conflict and create more peace in your home. Ultimately, true empathy creates deeper intimacy in all our relationships. It's really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you've heard us talk about empathy a lot on the podcast. So before you tune us out, I just want you to know we're taking a little bit of a different angle on it today. And so stay tuned because we're going to jump in a little bit of a different way. But you know what? We've learned a lot about what true empathy is over the years and how it's really very different than sympathy.
It is.
And where we've learned a lot of it from is researcher, author, and speaker Brene Brown. There's this short little video she's got on YouTube that we really love and feel like it brings some amazing insight into what empathy is and what it isn't and how it's helpful in situations where it's really needed.
Right.
And we highly recommend you go check out this video when you're done listening to the podcast because it's only a few minutes long. It's very simple, but we believe it's also profound. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. If you have never seen it before, you just head over there. It's animated. It's kind of fun so awesome. and all that. But it's really, it's kind of touching, actually.
Yeah.
I've probably seen it about 250 times.
Oh, yeah, at least.
And I still kind of tear up a little bit when I watch it just because I'm convicted as part of why.
Yeah.
But in the video, Brene states that there are 4 parts to true empathy. The first one is perspective taking. And really, that can be a full-time job within step family dynamics, right? Because there's a whole lot of perspectives to try to take on.
Oh, yeah.
And it can be challenging. The second one is staying out of judgment. I'll tell you what, as a stepdad, that's been really challenging along the way. The third is recognizing emotion in other people. I like to get high-centered on my own emotions, but empathy calls me to pay attention to other people's emotions.
Right.
And fourth, communicating on an emotional level.
Ooh.
So we've talked a lot here on the show about the importance of giving kids and stepkids empathy when they're struggling with blended family dynamics, and they need to be understood. And that's really important. But we thought it might be helpful to do a bit of a deep dive around how to show up well in our marriage and increase empathy for each other. Because it's not just about the kids. Empathy is important in our marriage for so many reasons. And so we're going to explore some of those today. And we know that special occasions, things like the holidays, tend to create tension and sometimes conflict between us as a couple. And when that happens, it's pretty natural for empathy to kind of go the way of the buffalo.
Yeah.
But if we can stay focused on empathy, it can make a big difference in how we're able to stay connected, make decisions as a team, and work through any difficult situations that might come up through the holiday season and beyond.
Absolutely. And we've had many, many disagreements over the years, haven't we, honey?
That's putting it lightly.
And most of them were fueled by challenging blended family dynamics.
Yep.
And when I think back to times when we were able to empathize well and understand each other, our disagreements and our problems were so much easier to work through and to resolve.
For sure.
But empathy didn't always come easy for us, and I'm pretty sure we're not alone in that.
I think we've talked to enough couples to realize we're not the only ones.
There can be some hidden challenges that steer us away from responding to each other with true empathy. And that's what we want to explore today. The barriers that might get in the way of being able to respond with true empathy.
Yeah.
And after we explore those barriers, we're going to offer some practical tips around how you can move beyond the barriers and show up well in your relationship, even during the stress of the holiday season.
Nice. Maybe we'll have a good Christmas this year.
Yeah,
honey.
wouldn't that be nice?
All right. Well, let's talk about the first barrier to empathy, and that's all about avoidance.
Oh.
You know what? Sometimes it just feels easier to avoid our partner's perspective, right? We don't want to empathize with them because often their perspective is kind of full of pain. And some of that pain might be directed at us, or we might even feel responsible for some of their pain. And when that's the case, it can be really hard to listen as they express their pain and really hear where that pain is coming from. It might feel like an attack against us. So for some of us, avoidance tends to just kind of be naturally our default when our spouse is expressing some difficult emotions. We just aren't comfortable being on the receiving end of their pain because it makes us feel bad about ourselves. But unfortunately, this kind of reaction is going to make it impossible for us to actually show true empathy toward our spouse and help them to work through whatever it is they might be going through. And that can leave them feeling misunderstood or abandoned or alone in their pain. And that doesn't work out well for either of us.
Right.
Yeah.
And avoidance can manifest in different kind of ways. And I know all of these because for years I was a chronic avoider.
I wasn't going to say it.
I was not very skilled at empathy in the early years of our marriage. I think you would agree with that, honey.
I do agree with that.
And I'd avoid by either shutting down, so I'd kind of just check out in the moment, and it was clear to you, honey, I'm sure, that I just wasn't listening to you, and I really wasn't available for you emotionally.
Sure.
Or sometimes I'd remove myself physically by walking away or escaping to the bathroom for a long time or making up some excuse to have to go and do something in that moment so that I didn't have to hear about your painful emotions. I really wasn't there for you.
Yeah, there were times where that was really tough for me because I felt abandoned, which is actually one of my core pain points when I feel that way. And I sometimes wondered, did you even care about what I was experiencing? And often those were the moments where I really needed you.
Yeah.
So that avoidance would trigger even more difficult emotion for me. And then for me, I'd just get angry and I'd lash out at you. And then, of course,
I'd avoid
you would avoid me because I'm lashing out at you. So I don't really blame you for that. And then I'd feel abandoned again, and around and around and around we'd go, right, through that cycle.
Yeah. So we know from personal experience that avoidance is a barrier to empathy, and it's not an effective way to work through our struggles.
Yeah.
All right. So on to the next barrier that we want to talk about, and that's miscommunication. We found that for us and for many couples we've worked with, that miscommunication or lack of clarity is something that can happen in a split second.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And this one is all about how we communicate with each other when emotions are elevated and stress is high.
Yeah, you know, when both of us, or maybe just one of us, is experiencing some emotional pain, like we're feeling confused or overwhelmed with the situation of whatever's happening, it can be hard to express what we're feeling in a way that's clear and concise. I know that when my emotions are high, I don't communicate nearly as well.
Yeah.
We might tend to overreact, or we get flooded with a lot of mixed emotions, and we're struggling to even describe what's going on to our spouse. And when that happens, our words come out in ways that can easily be misunderstood or misconstrued, right? And if we're the spouse on the receiving end of that, we then misinterpret that, and we make incorrect assumptions about the situation, and we may even jump to some conclusions and react in some ways that just aren't helpful. And this is when empathy often gets shut down because, again, it's impossible to truly be empathetic toward our spouse if we don't fully and accurately understand what's going on for them. How can I do that perspective-taking piece if I can't even get clear on what you're trying to tell me?
Right.
So empathy gets hijacked at that point.
And the reason why this happens so quickly and we can be blindsided by it is because many times the spouse who's in distress and is trying to communicate doesn't fully understand themselves what's going on, right?
True.
These dynamics are so confusing sometimes.
Emotions.
I know. And they might be in that fight or flight mode and experiencing some highly charged emotions that makes it hard to clearly define and describe what's happening inside. We've all been there.
Yeah.
So in those challenging moments, when one or both of us are struggling with difficult emotions, it can be really easy for miscommunication to take place. And this is a barrier to empathy because everything is unclear, and often we end up reacting from a place of ambiguous information and assumption instead of true understanding. These kind of interactions can leave both partners feeling misunderstood, unheard, and alone. And they can escalate conflict and make problems even worse.
Boy, Merry Christmas, huh?
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, we're not done yet. There's another barrier to empathy, right, that we want to explore today, and that is a lack of awareness. And this one, too, was something that we struggled with for a lot of years, and we've seen other couples struggle with it as well. And there's kind of two areas of awareness or lack of awareness that we want to talk about. One of them can be especially challenging for blended family couples. So let's tackle that one first, hon.
Let's. Often blended couples have limited awareness around each other's triggers.
Oh boy, touchy triggers.
Yeah, and this can often be a barrier to empathy. So I'll just share an example of how this played out for us. When we got together, we did what most new couples do, and we talked about our past relationships. So before we got married, I had told you, honey, about my previous marriages, and most specifically about my daughter's dad, who I was co-parenting with.
Sure.
So, Mike, you did have some awareness around the dysfunction of my relationship with my former spouse and why things didn't work out between us.
Sure.
But this was really general awareness.
Yeah.
And most of us have a certain amount of general awareness going into a new relationship. But what Mike couldn't have known was how my past relationship and the wounds that I'd experienced would influence our relationship in some unpredictable ways that were hard to fully understand and cope with.
For sure.
And this doesn't just include our previous relationships, but it also includes our family of origin issues. And again, Mike and I had spent many hours talking about my past, and he had a general awareness around my issues, especially around being controlled.
Right.
But honey, you really had no idea how our dynamics as a couple and how your behaviors and personality would trigger my issues of being controlled. There was just no way you could have fully known or been aware of the problems and the conflict this would cause in our marriage. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And so for years, I inadvertently did or said things that would trigger your fear of being controlled. And then you'd react in ways that I wasn't prepared to handle because I didn't fully understand what the heck was going on under the surface for you. I really wasn't able to respond with empathy because your reactions didn't make sense to me. And it was overwhelming. It was frustrating, frankly.
Sure.
And eventually, though, about 10 years in, after a decade of trying, and after each of us worked with a counselor, we started gaining some more awareness about those painful triggers that we each had, the ones that were rooted in our past. And we both had them. It wasn't just you. I've got a lot of abandonment triggers that you just weren't fully aware of and had no idea how to respond to yourself.
That's right.
But, once we gained more awareness of each other's triggers and we started to learn how to respond to them in more healthy ways, things got so much better for us.
That's right. And we were able to be more empathetic with each other, even when we accidentally triggered each other.
Yeah, and that's part of the key of empathy, of being able to do that even when things aren't going that great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the second area where a lack of awareness can be a barrier to empathy is around our different personality types. And I mentioned a minute ago that sometimes Mike's behaviors would trigger my control issue. Well, one of his behaviors that set me off was really more about our differing personalities, but it was also a trigger. So it was a double whammy for me. And for a long time, I really kind of poo-pooed this concept of personality types.
You poo-pooed it, all right.
I did. I don't like being labeled, and I just thought this whole concept was just irrelevant. But I've since realized how wrong I was. Because having awareness around our different personalities has kind of been mind-blowing for us. And it's given us the ability to be more empathetic towards each other.
Sure, yeah.
So let me just share this behavior of Mike's. Okay. Yes. For a long time, this was a really big issue for me until I understood how differently we're wired. What I've learned is that Mike is high on the Myers-Briggs scale of what they call a judger. And this doesn't mean you're judgmental, honey.
That's right. Thank you for clarifying.
No, it really is about how you organize your life. So as a judger, Mike likes to plan ahead, and he's uncomfortable leaving things open or unplanned.
Yep.
And that's simply how he's wired.
Yeah.
So he likes to come to me and discuss lots of upcoming plans, sometimes weeks or months in advance, and he likes to get into the details. That's kind of his thing.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Well, for me, this felt really controlling and suffocating. In fact, for years, I believed that you were a control freak because you had to know everything and figure it all out and get it all settled. It was just really hard for me.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess now in hindsight, I can see that the reason this felt controlling for you, hon, as we discovered this, is because on the Myers-Briggs scale, you're the opposite end of this particular piece of the scale.
Right.
You're a high, what they call perceiver, and that doesn't mean you're more perceptive.
No.
It just means that you're not naturally wired to plan ahead. You enjoy spontaneity. You like to keep your options open. So every time I'm trying to plan things ahead of time, it actually stifles your spontaneity.
Right.
Yeah.
I like to keep my options open.
Yeah. And that mixed with that previous relationship that felt controlling to you suddenly becomes a trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
And so our unique and different wiring isn't something that's necessarily good or bad, right or wrong. We just go about organizing our lives very differently. And it's a natural response. So before I understood all of this, I would get easily triggered and feel controlled when you went into planning mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now that I'm aware of our different personality types, I'm able to have empathy for you because I know how uncomfortable it is for you to leave things to the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of getting triggered and upset and calling you a control freak, I'm now able to engage in planning with you.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah, because I've realized that you're not trying to control me. You want me to partner with you.
Now, the opposite's also true, right? Because I'm aware of your unique wiring and your need for spontaneity. So when we do plan together, we purposely leave some things open and unplanned so that your wiring is also honored and you don't feel suffocated by over planning.
Right.
So awareness around our personality types has changed the way that we interact around so many things.
Oh,
because
yeah.
we're actually on opposite ends of all the scales in the Myers-Briggs personality spectrum. And it's no wonder why we struggled for so many years, because we're just simply different.
Right.
Like you said a moment ago, it's not right or wrong or good or bad. It's just different.
Yeah.
But now that we're in the know, it's okay that we're different. And we've even learned to actually appreciate each other's differences. And that's where empathy really kicks in. We can really see each other for who each other is in those moments when things are coming at us from two very different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 3 barriers to empathy, and we're going to recap those for just a second. And I challenge you might even just have to push pause in this moment. I challenge you to go get a pad of paper, a pen, something like that. And as we recap these, think about which one might be the biggest one that you struggle with in your marriage, in your relationship.
Yeah.
And actually write it down.
Yeah.
Okay, as a reminder. So what's the first barrier to empathy? Just a quick recap.
The first one was avoidance.
That's right.
And that's when we might be feeling attacked or uncomfortable with the pain our spouse is sharing, and it just seems easier to escape or avoid whatever they might be going through.
The next one was misunderstanding. That's when our communication just breaks down and we end up feeling confused, or we react to assumptions around what our spouse is trying to convey, but maybe we're not hearing the full story.
Right. And then we explored 2 areas where a lack of awareness can be barriers to empathy around our triggers and our different personalities.
That's right. And we talked about how these 3 barriers can leave our partner feeling misunderstood, unheard, abandoned, maybe even alone. And none of us want our partner to feel that way.
No.
That's not why we got together in the first
No.
place, right? We want them to feel supported and loved and known. So we're going to shift gears here in just a second and talk about how we can move beyond these common barriers. So if you're pressing pause to write your note of which of those barriers is most challenging for you, don't forget to come back and hit play and keep going, because we're not done. Okay.
Right.
All right. So everybody's back with us, and now we're going to dive in and we're going to share practical tips that will increase your ability to respond with empathy. So keep up, because they're going to come rapid fire.
All right. Tip number 1 is cultivate vulnerability in your relationship. And I think a lot of us struggle with being vulnerable in that moment when our spouse is struggling.
It's not only the guys.
No. And maybe it feels scary because there's risk in being vulnerable and truly connecting with someone on a deeper level. In order to empathize with your spouse's pain, you must be willing to enter into a vulnerable and sacred place that might be kind of uncomfortable for you. And maybe it's uncomfortable because it's simply new to you. It could be that vulnerability and authenticity wasn't modeled in your family of origin, and maybe you've never experienced deep levels of vulnerability in your past relationships, so it's hard.
Yeah, and if you're really connecting with that, trust us, you're not alone.
Yeah.
We've really been there, and we've learned how to cultivate vulnerability in our relationship, and it's increased our intimacy and our empathy for each other. And we've really had to work at it.
We have.
So maybe a minute ago, you identified that your barrier around empathy is avoidance, because you tend to get uncomfortable in these kind of difficult conversations, and you feel like this is an area where you'd like to grow. If that's you, we encourage you to go back and check out episode 98, which is called Is fear of vulnerability keeping you from loving your spouse wholeheartedly? And we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go back and check that episode out. It might really help you out.
Absolutely.
Okay, what's the second tip?
Tip number 2, avoid getting defensive or going into fix-it mode.
What? I never do that.
It's understandable why we might tend to get defensive in those moments when our partner is expressing pain and maybe we're feeling a bit attacked.
For sure.
However, we need to remember a defensive response is far from an empathetic one because defensiveness signals to your partner that their concerns don't matter. They feel invalidated, unheard, and dismissed, which will stir up even more painful emotions.
Yeah. When we jump into fix-it mode, just trying to fix whatever our spouse might be struggling with, this is also going to send some negative and invalidating messages to them that are far from empathetic. And I got to be honest, I really struggle with this one. I am all about fixing it. I have a lot of leadership responsibilities in different areas of my life, and it's a place where I just tend to go. I'm fixing problems all the time.
Yeah, you're a get things done kind of guy.
Absolutely. But I realize when I'm trying to handle your heart with care, that I need to back away from fix-it mode and really be able to listen to you. Because if I stay in fix-it mode, you're going to end up feeling unheard, dismissed, maybe even you might think I'm telling you you're incompetent to work through the challenges that you're trying to face.
Yeah.
That I have to fix it for you because you can't.
Yeah, that's all true.
But I mean, it's all true that you end up feeling that way, but none of it is actually true because I want to hear you. I don't want you to be dismissed. And I do know that you're competent. And so going into fix-it mode doesn't actually help me get what I want, which is to love you well.
Right.
And what most of us really want when we're hurting is someone that's safe to process our emotions with, someone who can just listen with some empathy and not try to fix us or try to fix the problem that we're facing.
Exactly. And you've gotten a lot better with your fixing.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I do have to affirm that.
Well, that's good.
On to tip number 3, which is maintain a curiosity mindset. Now, we've got to realize that the opposite of empathy is indifference or apathy. When we're mainly focused on our own agenda and we really aren't concerned about what anyone else might be experiencing, then there's a lack of interest, care, or concern. But when you're able to maintain a curiosity mindset, you can open yourself up to not only hearing, but understanding your spouse's perspective. Curiosity leads to interest, care, and concern. It's the antidote to indifference and apathy.
That's good.
So maintain that curiosity mindset. So important. All right, honey, what's tip number 4?
Tip number 4 is to improve your communication. Just do better.
If it were only that easy.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of things that couples can do to improve how they communicate and avoid patterns of miscommunication. We help blended couples learn new skills and develop healthy patterns of communication all the time. In fact, it's one of our favorite things to work with couples on. And we've picked up these skills along the way and developed healthier ways to communicate in our own relationship over the last decade or so.
Right.
Especially when it comes to navigating disagreement and conflict. I'm amazed at where we are compared to a decade ago. Yeah.
It's a miracle.
It is, but it's learned skill.
It is. Yeah. And there are some specific things that can quickly lead to miscommunication, as we've learned in our own lives and with couples that we've worked with. And it's around assumptions that we tend to make when we're engaged in a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that each of us can formulate what we call stories in our heads about each other. That's what those assumptions are. And sometimes we can negatively react to these stories or jump to unfair conclusions and even incorrect beliefs about each other.
For sure.
And about the situation.
Yeah.
And this is where healthy communication quickly breaks down when those stories take over. But when you can learn how to become aware of your stories and to call them out and communicate with each other about them, you'll begin to reverse these unhealthy patterns and avoid miscommunication. And that's what's going to help you to be more empathetic with each other.
For sure.
So if you identified that miscommunication can be a barrier for you around empathy, and this is an area where you'd like to learn more, we encourage you to go back and listen to episode 36. And we had our special guest and friend, Mark Warren, on the show. Yep, in episode 36. And he talked about how to change your stories and grow connection. And so we'll put a link in the show notes if you'd like to check that out and take a step in improving your communication and your empathy.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so that's 4 tips so far. We want to cultivate vulnerability in our relationship. We want to avoid getting defensive or going into fix-it mode. We want to maintain a curiosity mindset and improve that communication. All right, let's keep going. We got a couple more. So tip number 5 is to increase your awareness. Now, this might sound like a no-brainer, right? I think we all believe that we have a high sense of awareness, but when it comes to the challenges of blended family dynamics, awareness is something all of us can do a little better on.
Right.
And this is often because it's really easy for us to get stuck in our own expectations, our own agendas, our own perspectives, and our own pain points.
Right.
And so being more aware means that you're going to need to step out of yourself a little bit and choose to be more aware of those around you, about what their expectations are and their agendas and their perspective and their pain points, right? And this is not easy. You know, one expert in this whole step family realm, her name is Patricia Papernow, says that pain trumps empathy. Right? What a simple statement, but something we all have to pay attention to. You might believe that you're really aware and empathizing with other people around you, but when you experience your own pain or your own disappointment, it's pretty natural for your empathy to decrease, and it can even take a pretty big nosedive.
Yeah, that can happen to all of us.
Absolutely.
But it is possible to increase your awareness and broaden your understanding of your spouse and their unique perspectives. And 2 specific areas where you might decide to focus is around understanding your triggers and your spouse's triggers, or you might focus on understanding each of your personality types and how your different wiring can impact your relationship, like we talked about earlier.
Right.
Increasing your awareness around these 2 areas is something we help couples with all the time. And this will give you more empathy for each other. And we know that from personal experience. We've lived it.
Absolutely. You know, when we first got married, I really struggled around parenting. And that was a huge point of tension in our marriage because I was unhappy with what was going on. I felt like Annika was kind of ruling the house and you didn't seem to be doing anything about it. And what I really wanted, I wanted it fixed. So I got defensive. I went into fix it mode. My perspective was, hey, we've got to figure this thing out. What I didn't really slow down enough to figure out was the amount of pain and fear and struggle,
guilt,
and not only from your previous relationships, but all the way back to your childhood that said, well, you needed to do a little bit of work to work on this whole parenting thing. And I couldn't expect you to just change overnight. And as you started getting vulnerable and you started sharing some of that pain and some of that fear and some of that history, and then I actually started to open my ears a little bit and listen to some of that. All of a sudden, we started finding more teamwork and empathy for each other. And you started saying, hey, yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I hear your perspective and I do want to make some changes. So that's part of why we ended up in a parenting class.
And I need your support and your help along the way.
Absolutely. And I started to get more patient and listening to you and saying, okay, we can make incremental change, imperfect progress, right? And all of a sudden, just starting to take on each other's perspective and gain a little bit more awareness about what was going on underneath it all. And it radically changed everything. And it really made an impact on probably one of the biggest tension points in our relationship.
Definitely.
All of a sudden it changed. So this whole lack of awareness thing is really important. And if you've identified that lack of awareness as your particular barrier to empathy, this might be an area where you need to grow. So you might go back and check out episode number 5, which is all about coping with the triggers and the hurts that are from your past that we were just talking about. And that'll also help you to just be more understanding about your spouse's triggers and hurts as well.
Right.
Because both of you came in with this stuff.
We all have baggage.
Yeah, for sure.
Or if you and your spouse are ready to gain awareness around your personality differences from a positive viewpoint and maybe even come to appreciate your unique wiring, we encourage you to reach out to us and schedule a free coaching call. We're happy to talk about how we can support you in this area of awareness, which will increase your ability to empathize and understand each other more.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Got to increase the awareness. That's great.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm glad I didn't poo-poo it forever.
That's good. All right. Well, let's keep going here. This is tip number 6, and that's be committed to building connection. The reality is that living in the tension of blended family dynamics is simply just challenging. And it often leads to relational distance and some disconnection, which is the complete opposite of what we really want.
Yeah.
But we love what Brené Brown has to say about real connection. Here it is. She says, the truth is rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. Empathy is about making real connections. You know, isn't that something that we all want more of in our marriage and in our blended family journey?
Yeah.
We want to be united as we lead our family. We want to be united as we make decisions and work through problems. But usually this isn't as easy as we think it's going to be. And there are some specific areas and attitudes around blended family dynamics that can really break our unity and create disconnection in our relationship.
Absolutely. Now, back in episode 108, we explored 3 unity breakers that are detrimental to your connection and how you can avoid them.
Yeah.
So if this is an area where you'd like to learn more about and grow in your connection, you can go back to the show notes and we'll have a link there to this episode 108. But as Brené Brown says, empathy is about making real connections. So the more you can increase your ability to empathize, the more connection you're building. So we encourage you to take down the barriers and the unity breakers to stay committed to building connection in your relationship and in your home.
Absolutely. All right. So we've got 3 barriers to empathy: that avoidance, miscommunication, that lack of awareness. And then there's those 6 tips that you can apply today, this week, to overcome your barriers and increase your ability to empathize, which is ultimately going to grow connection and a deeper level of intimacy in your relationship. And you know what? As we head into this holiday weekend, we could all use a little bit more empathy for each other, and maybe we'll find we'll have a little bit more fun.
Absolutely.
Right? So we want to challenge you to choose just one of these tips and give it a try as you head toward this Christmas weekend. So let's do a quick recap. Tip number 1.
Cultivate vulnerability in your relationship.
That's right. Tip 2 is avoid getting defensive or going into fix-it mode.
Yep. Tip 3, maintain a curiosity mindset.
And 4, improve your communication.
And tip number 5, increase your awareness.
And finally, be committed to building connection. You really can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can.
Absolutely.
If we can do it, anyone can.
Agreed. Well, hey, we hope you have a wonderful holiday, however you celebrate this weekend. We hope that you get to experience some empathy for each other and some true connection along the way. And that's going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.